Well, good morning. I'm so glad you're here. You know, I love the Old Testament because the Old Testament is full of stories. And I'm just drawn to people who have stories because they're interesting. If you have a story, I'm all in because I just think you have something to share with me that I would have interest in. And this story that I'm going to tell you today is engaging to me, and it's about King Saul. But if you are a watcher of the show on the streaming networks, Better Call Saul is one of those. And Saul, in this case, is a lawyer. And not all lawyers are alike. I know we make fun of lawyers and, all of that, but this lawyer has some sketchy, shady kind of things going on in his life, and as a result of his choices, makes some bad behavior decisions. So that is not unlike our King Saul that we will talk about this morning. He gets about 20 chapters of ink in 1 Samuel, and it's a fascinating story. And there's no new thing under the sun. We keep hearing. So what you're going to see in the life of Saul, our Better Call Saul guy, is long before demonstrated in the life of Saul, the guy we're going to take a look at. So let's take a look at what's going on here. You need to know that Saul becomes king. This is the first person that would be a king of Israel. The second person was David, the third person was Solomon. So those were your first three biggies, and Saul becomes king in our story. And this is Samuel, who was the prophet. Samuel, it takes place in his book, and Samuel is explaining to the people why it's not a good idea to bring Saul on as king, or anyone for that matter, because this is what Samuel was saying. The people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but we will have a king over us." Now, imagine, God said, "I want to be the king. I want to be your king." Now, who wouldn't want God? Well, Israel didn't want God. They saw the other nations around them and said, "We want to be like them. We want a man with skin on to go to war for us, not God. We want our own king. We will have a king over us." So when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said to him, "There he is, a man of whom I spoke. This one shall reign over my people." So God acquiesced. The gracious God that he is, he said, "Samuel, just get over it, buddy. It's not you they're rejecting, it's me. They don't want me to be their king. So I'm going to give them a king. He's not going to be what they want at the end of the day, but I'm going to give them the king they want, and it's going to be my man Saul." And here's what happens next. Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it out on Saul's head and kissed him and said, "The Lord has anointed you commander over his inheritance." And this is kind of what that would look like. Back in the day, if someone was called to a leadership position, they were anointed with oil, and that's what Samuel is doing with Saul. Now, this story doesn't fall far from the trees for me, again, because the people clamored for a king. Have you ever heard this? If you were a parent or you were a babysitter, or maybe you were an older brother or sister, and one of those children said to me, "You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me." And if you remember Malcolm in the Middle, it goes, "You're not the boss of me, you're not the boss of me, you're not the boss of me, you're not so big." Remember that? Well, this happened long ago with the nation of Israel when they said to Samuel, "You're not the boss of me," or even to God, "You're not the boss of me." Well, this doesn't go well for them, as you're going to see. So Saul becomes a born-again prophet. And you might say, "Are you kidding me? I mean, we have that information in the Bible about Saul becoming a Christian?" Yes. Now, you need to know that Christians back in the day did the very same thing that we do. They believed in Jesus for everlasting life. They were looking forward to the cross. We look back to the cross because it's history for us. We do the very same thing. We believe in Jesus for everlasting life. So Saul knew these things. He had been told all things regarding how he could have eternal life by Samuel the prophet. That was their job. All the prophets witnessed about Jesus and they knew who he was. I'll prove it to you. Here's the passage. Samuel said to Saul, "The Spirit of the Lord will come upon you and you will prophesy." Don't miss that. "And be turned into another man." There's your second clue. So God gave him another heart that day. So this happened for him. Saul became a Christian, a born-again prophet of God, and Acts chapter 10, the verses in your bulletin, will help you understand that in a greater way. But this is a very big deal that he became a Christian. Now, do all Christians do really well in terms of following Jesus? And I hope that you're going, no, there's been times when I haven't really done well following Jesus as a disciple. I know I'm saved, I know I'm going to heaven, but my walk with him isn't really what I want it to be. Well, you're not going to see a better picture of that than in the life of Saul. So I want to show you some bad behavior, and it'll begin with Saul's bad behavior, number one. I've only mentioned 4 of them. There's at least 6. 2 of them include David trying to kill, Saul trying to kill David, the one who would succeed him, and also the event where Saul set up a memorial to himself. Sounds a little egotistical, but it's another one that's not in the list of bad behaviors. Here's bad behavior number 1. Saul offered the burnt offering. Here's what's happening. They're fixing to go to war. And you don't go to war without consulting God, and you give him what he wants in the way of an offering. Well, he and Samuel had made a deal that that Samuel would offer the offering before they went to battle, and Samuel kept waiting, and on the very last day, he comes up ready to do the offering, and guess who went in before him? Saul did. Saul offered the burnt offering. Here he is making that offering. Samuel's coming up at the end going, "Oh, this is not good." Listen to what he says. Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God." And he just busts out with it. You've done a really, really wrong thing. Now, Saul knew this. Saul was a Benjamite. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was not from the tribe of Levi, and only the tribe of Levi could offer sacrifices. So Samuel was able to offer sacrifices. But if you remember, Aaron was Moses' brother, and that was the only tribe that was allowed to offer sacrifices. And of the 5 times it's listed in Leviticus chapter 1, I've given you 3 of them. Aaron's sons shall bring the blood. The sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar, and the priest shall burn all on the altar. All having to do with the tribe of Levi, not Benjamin. And so Saul really, really messed up and got called out for it. But it gets worse. Watch this. Saul's bad behavior event number 2. Samuel said to Saul, "Thus says the Lord, go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them." Those pretty simple instructions. But here's what the background of that is. Amalek was a nation that really gave the Israelites a hard time as they were moving toward the promised land. As a matter of fact, they did a behind the scenes attack on the stragglers at the end of the pack and killed a bunch of people, and God was not happy at all with Amalek. And so this is payback time for Amalek. It's coming, look for it. Saul's going to be my avenger. And so he was told by Samuel, attack them, don't leave anything. It's a total wipeout. And so here's Saul doing the end zone dance. He's spiking the football. He's taking the victory lap going, yay, I've done what God told me to do. Watch, he even says it. Then Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, I have performed the commandment of the Lord, yay, me. But this is what Samuel's answer to Saul was. Oh, really? Look at this. I see cattle and I see sheep. And here's what he says. What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? Ooh, this doesn't sound good. Doesn't sound like you did the job at all, which he didn't. Saul said to Samuel, well, the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, not my God, our God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. So this is partial obedience, which is not obedience. And all of us get that. We have kids who sometimes will obey us, sometimes or partly, but not all the time, and that's not good, that's not obedience. And that's what's happening here. So notice what he does. It's what we all do. We blame people. We put the blame on somebody else. The people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen. Well, wait a minute. Saul, I thought you were in charge. You're the king here. But the people, that's what we do too. And I think it's just a picture of us. So here's what's happening. Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Listen, I don't care what you bring in the way of a sacrifice. That's not what God's after. God wants obedience. He wants you to do what he tells you to do. That's the bottom line here. This is so interesting to me. Look what he equates disobedience with. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Look at the things that he's comparing stubbornness and rebellion to. That's a pretty serious list that it gets clumped in with. And so it's a big deal what Saul, in fact, did not do. And so there's consequences always to our bad choices. Because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he also rejected you from being king. And isn't that at the bottom of it all? When we're disobedient, we're rejecting the word of the Lord. And I don't know if you can make that look better, but that's basically what it is. We know you want us to do this, but I'm not going to do that. So that's disobedience. And that's where things go south for us in our walk of discipleship when we choose to disobey. So it gets worse. Here is bad behavior event number 3. Check it out. Now Samuel had died. His sons were corrupt. The nation of Israel wasn't moving in a positive direction. Saul was a king, but not the best, as you've seen already. Samuel dies. Here's his mentor. He's gone. What am I going to do? I'm really torn here. When Saul and the army of the Philistines, when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. I don't know what to do. I got to do something. So here's what he did. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him. Now, we can connect with that because sometimes when we're on this path of disobedience, when we don't want to do what God tells us to do, sometimes we even stiff-arm God and say, yeah, don't call me, I'll call you. Well, God, he gets that, and he'll just kind of step back and let us sink ourselves. And he'll be a little distant, and that's what was going on here. He wasn't answering the prayers of Saul because he was in a jam right now, but because he wasn't answering, Saul was scared, and this is what he did. So Saul said to his servants, find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. Now, a medium is someone in the spirit world. It's someone who helps you connect with someone who's already passed away or who's already gone. And this is strictly forbidden in the Bible to do this. We're not to mess around with the spirit world. So horoscopes, Ouija boards, anything like that, God says, I don't want you messing with that. Stay away from those things. And he didn't. As a matter of fact, verse prior to this says Saul got rid of all the mediums. So he's dressing up as though he's not the king, so he can go visit this lady. He wants her to have a seance. Now, I'm sure you know what that is. I experienced a seance when I was a kid. I was 12, and I was in an English class, and it was the real deal. I mean, I was spooked about it. I was not a believer. Didn't come to be a believer until I was 19. Here I am, 12. I'm in this class, and we are bringing up John F. Kennedy. And two of the girls in that class, dark candles, the whole thing, saw him, said they saw him. And I was really freaked out by that. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand it. I mean, two things have really freaked me out in that spirit thing. That was when The Exorcist came out. I don't know if you remember that movie. And this seance event that I witnessed. That's why God doesn't want us to mess with those things. So here's what happens. The woman said, whom shall I bring up? Saul said, bring up Samuel for me. Ooh, bring up Samuel? Now Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? He was not happy with Saul about what just happened. And so here's how Saul responds to him. I'm deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore. Man, I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my rope. I just had to get some counsel from you. And so this is what he says. Therefore I have called you that you may reveal to me what I should do. And here is the answer that he got from Samuel. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord. See how important that is? Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. What is this? Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hands of the Philistines. God's going to give you over to the consequences of your bad choices. And then this is what he says, which I find very interesting. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. So if you ever had this doubt, wondering, is Saul saved? Is he there? Is he there with Jesus? This is your answer. Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Where was Samuel? Samuel was in paradise. And so this is what he's predicting the very next day for King Saul. So the Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. And so it's just getting worse. But it gets worse than this. Watch this. Bad behavior event number 4. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines. So it's all going south. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded. You've seen those movies where you got tons and tons of archers. They're just shooting arrows into the sky, hoping that it hits the enemy. And one of them did hit Saul, badly wounded. And so he has a request from his armor bearer. Draw your sword and thrust me through with it. Now here you are a kid. You're carrying the sword of Saul. And the king of Israel says, take me out. Just thrust me through, because I don't want to fall into the hands of these bad people. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid, and I can totally see why he would feel that way. So look what Saul does. Took a sword and fell on it. So he committed suicide. And you would have 4 different big bad behavior events. Let me review those with you. Saul's bad behavior. He offered the burnt offering, which he was not supposed to do. He refused to destroy Amalek, went against God's orders. He sought a medium, went to the dark side, and checked out everything he knew he wasn't supposed to do. And then he committed suicide. And so the question that ought to bubble up in our minds is this: will we see Saul in heaven? Because there are people who would say, no, you won't see Saul in heaven. Number one, look at his bad behavior. And they'll cite this. This is what they'll say, and you've probably heard it. Maybe you've said it. I don't know. But it's something that we have to clear up. And some people would say, well, Saul was never saved in the first place. He was never saved. And we've debunked that nasty rumor by what we saw at the beginning of the message when God gave him another heart and when God made him a new man that day. And you're not going to prophesy like he did, according to Acts chapter 10, if you're not a believer. And so, yes, we will see him, but the strongest evidence is this one here. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me, Samuel said. So we have a man here who is going to be in heaven. Now, another thing that you might hear from someone, you'll hear, number one, well, he was never saved to begin with because his behavior was bad, and a Christian is going to be good. And that's not always true, because that hasn't always been true of you and me. We don't always be good just because we're Christians. Sometimes we get off that narrow path and we go on a different path for a little while. And if we're wise, we'll come back to the path and get on the straight and narrow again. But that doesn't always happen. And it's realistic to recognize that there are many people in the Bible who got off that path and never got back on the path. And Saul was one of them. He was one of those. So there's something else that will be said by some about Saul. They'll say, well, he lost his salvation. Well, you can't lose salvation because it's a free gift given to us the moment we believe. Jesus said, he that believes in me has, present tense, everlasting life. So the only third option we have is that Saul had eternal life he could never lose. You will see Saul in heaven. You absolutely will. And we have evidence from 1 Samuel to that effect. So here is what a bottom line might look like. Bad behavior brings great damage. Bad behavior brings great damage in this life. Watch this. But also in the next life. It can bring this kind of damage, distance from God, and loss of reward, certainly in the next life. And we don't want that at all. You do not want that. Trust me. You want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in a few things. I will make you ruler over much. Enter into the joy of the Lord. That's what you want to hear. You do not want to hear Jesus disapproving of your life after his evaluation of your life at the judgment seat of Christ. I'll share more with that in just a moment. So bad behavior brings great damage, but not loss of salvation. And this is what I wanted you to come away with the life of Saul, because there's going to be people who say, there's no way that person can be a Christian. And you have evidence to say, that's not true. Let's take a look at the life of Saul, and I think you can defend it easily from what I've showed you here this morning. So here's my title, Better Call Saul, and I want to take a minute just to do that. Let's give Saul a ring. Now, I'm not wanting to put words in Saul's mouth. So I can't tell you exactly that this is what he would say. So in my glorified, exaggerated mind, I'm going to think this might be what Saul would say, okay? So I wrote it down so I wouldn't miss anything. So while getting ready for the message, I tried to get into the mind of King Saul. And in my exaggerated imagination, I thought a phone call might be something like this, okay? Hi, King Saul? Well, he might say, yes, but it's just Saul for now. I'd tell him that we're here studying his life this morning and wonder if he might help us out a bit. And I'm just guessing here, but I think he would say, sure, anything I can do to help out a fellow believer? You know, I really didn't do too well myself. I'd ask him, well, what do you mean by that? It wouldn't surprise me if he said, well, the number one thing is to be obedient. The Amalek incident really hurt my path going forward. I messed up in not doing what God told me to do. The prophet Samuel really hammered me on that one. Yeah, I even tried to blame the people, but not taking responsibility just made it worse. So I'd ask him to go on. And I can imagine Saul saying, and then when God went silent, I felt the distance between us. I very foolishly sought help from the spirit world. Big mistake. But I was just desperate. Boy, was Samuel chapped about that one too. Sensing that I'm getting some great firsthand experience, I might suggest this. Is it fair to say that making bad choices is a byproduct of disobedience? It seems to me that he'd say, absolutely. One bad decision after another. Then there at the end, I took my own life when I lost all hope. One more crazy bad choice. So, being the curious guy that I am, I'd ask, so what's next? And if you're among the inquiring minds want to know crowd, he might say something like this. Well, as we speak, I'm in the presence of Jesus, and that's awesome. We're all awaiting the judgment seat of Christ. My life will be evaluated, and Jesus will reward my good deeds. That's good news for sure. But I already know that I'm going to suffer some pretty significant loss of reward too. It's no one's fault but my own, and I'm praying for mercy. And I like the honesty of that. You know, my life is my life, and you're not responsible for my life. I have to answer for my own life when I stand before Jesus, and so will you. And I won't be there to help you, and you won't be there to help me. It's mano y mano, and it's an audience of one. And he goes over our life, and he is going to go over Saul's life, and Saul knows this. And you need to know that that's in your future. It is coming. You have an appointment with Jesus where he evaluates your life, and he's going to see if you took obedience and discipleship seriously. And if you didn't, then he'll reward what's good, and you'll suffer loss for what wasn't so good. And you want to hear him say, enter the joy of the Lord. So I hope that that's on your radar, that that's something you are thinking about every day. So let me wrap this up. So I can see me saying any parting words, and I can see Saul saying, yeah, trust God every day in your journey of discipleship. Then be obedient. Do what he says to do. You have his word right there at your fingertips. Now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but could you give me a bottom line? And I can see Saul saying this: bad behavior brings damage to your life now and will affect your reward in the future. But it does not affect your relationship with God as father and child. You are secure forever. I'd say, wow, that's very simply put. He might sign off by saying, yeah, I've had about 3,000 years to think about it. So I'm glad we called Saul. We were told to better call Saul. We did. Got some inside information from him, and I think he even puts it more succinctly in this bottom line. Bad behavior brings great damage, but not loss of salvation. Guys, this is gold when you're faced with people who think that a believer is not going to mess up, that they're always going to be following Jesus. That's just not the case. When I was sharing with a college girl one time, we did the simple saving message, and she said, it just sounds so simple, so easy. If it's that simple and that easy, why should I be good? And it was a great question. It's a very insightful question. And the reason why we should be good is because we have an evaluation that we are going to show up at and want to do well at. We want to be approved at this evaluation. And so when people challenge you regarding Christians who aren't living the life, because it doesn't matter that we live a life, yes, it absolutely does. It surely does, but not for salvation, but for discipleship. And I love to say it this way: salvation is free, discipleship will cost you. And I love to say it this way too: what you believe determines where you spend eternity. How you behave determines how you spend eternity. You separate those two things, salvation, which is free, and discipleship, which is costly, you have a handle on the Bible. If you don't, it's a world of trouble when you mix those two messages. So let's keep those separate, because that's what Saul needed to know and is teaching us this morning. So thank you this morning for being here, to hearing the words that Saul might say to us. Next week, Bob is going to be back up here, and he's going to be talking about ready or not. And this, I'm sure, will have some sort of implications to the rapture, and you'll want to be here for that 3-week series. So again, thank you for being here, and let's close our time in prayer. Father, thank you for the life of Saul. It didn't always work well for him, and I pray that you could teach us through his life that we really need to take obedience and following Jesus in a life of discipleship seriously. There's so much at stake. And I pray that our judgment seat experience would keep us focused on that appointment we have with him. And I pray that you would remind us again of how to do this walk with Jesus based on the life of Saul, and we've learned what not to do. I pray that our decisions would be wise and would be used of you in our walk with Jesus to avoid bad behavior and to applaud good behavior. And for how you'll answer, we'll give you thanks and praise. Amen. God bless you.